Today I'm talking with Dr. Jim Tucker, author of Life Before Life, about the subject that some people call loosely reincarnation, also an assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia. It's good to have you here today.
Thanks.
In your book, Life Before Life, you detail a number of cases of people who have claimed to have lived a previous life, and it's mainly your book focuses on children and their memories. Children between the ages of 2 and 3 sometimes give some very detailed accounts of a past existence. Can you give us an example of one of the cases?
Yeah, these are cases, it's not hypnosis or anything like that, but just spontaneously these kids start talking at a very early age. A lot of our cases were ones that Ian Stevenson investigated years ago, particularly in Asia. So one is a little girl named Kumkum Verma in India who said that she had lived in a city that was 25 miles away, and not just that she lived in the city, but named the district where she lived. Her aunt wrote down a lot of what she was saying, which included a lot of details like son's name, grandson's name, what the son did for work, town where the father lived, a lot of other personal details. And then eventually a friend of the father's went to that district and found that in fact all the statements the girl had said were accurate. And that's sort of typically what happens if the child gives enough details, including names of places, then people have often gone there and found that there was in fact a match for the statements that they were making.
And you have the birthmark cases, and the cases where kids are injured. Several cases dealt with children being born without fingers or toes, but they had recounted it in their previous life. That's how they died. Can you give us one of those
that's
cases?
right. I mean, there are a lot of cases. Ian read a book of over 200 such cases of kids with birthmarks and birth defects that match wounds, usually the fatal wounds that the previous person experienced. So, for instance, there was a little girl who recalled the life of someone who got his fingers chopped off as he was being murdered, and then was born with very deformed fingers. There's another little boy who talked about being born in another village who had lost the fingers of his right hand in a fodder chopping machine, and then he was born, his left hand was fine, but his right hand didn't have full fingers. There's also a case where the previous person had had skull surgery just before dying, and this girl was born with this band going around her head.
Very unusual on the back of her head. Yeah.
Very unusual, yeah.
Well, as you look at this, and you've studied a lot of the cases, and it goes back into the 1960s with Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was your mentor.
Yes.
You've detailed many, many cases. What does this say about the nature of our universe? We're not basically physical beings. Our brain is not the basic component, or is it what you call consciousness?
Yeah, well, it's certainly, the cases provide evidence that memories and emotions and sometimes even physical traumas can survive the death of the brain and carry over into another life. So that means questioning the whole materialist outlook that mainstream science has, that the physical world is all that there is, and that consciousness just sort of evolved accidentally as our brains evolved. What these cases, along with work in a lot of other areas, suggest is that there is more than just the physical universe, that there is this factor of consciousness that seems to be able to function separately, at least at times, function separately from a functioning brain.
In an interview I did with you at Rutherford.org on our Old Speak magazine, we talked a bit about people that die, mainly a lot of them by unnatural causes that come back. But they depict a place on the side where it's basically a real world to them, and as you would believe, just as real as this world. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong. But then you have the Christian belief of heaven and hell. Is there any evidence that when people go over, they go to a heaven? Is there a place called hell? I mean, this is the kind of questions you always get with these kind of things.
Yeah, and with our cases, about 20% of the children will describe events between lives. Now, the others don't, but the 20% do. And their descriptions vary. And some of them describe positive experiences, and some describe negative ones.
When they describe negative, what kind of negative experiences do they describe?
Well,
You hear about people floating inner light and all that. Those are the happy experiences.
yeah,
So there are negative experiences.
there can be, and there. I mean, they don't necessarily describe fire and brimstone, but ones of being uncomfortable or miserable or hungry, and sometimes with negative beings that are chasing after them and that sort of thing.
And these are people, though, that do get reincarnated and come back.
Well, that's right. These are the children who are reporting this from before they were born.
So they're getting a second chance or something like that.
Yeah, and with the American cases, on the positive side, a lot of them will use the word heaven, say that they were in heaven after they died and then before they came back for the next one.
What you're studying kind of challenges the whole idea of the materiality of what we believe, and you mentioned that. What does it say then how we should be conducting ourselves here in this life? Is there a lesson in all this, or is this just Dr. James Tucker doing research, but is there a lesson that we need to take away from all this?
Well,
I mean, put it in context.
yeah.
If you're going to a place where there's an inner light and it's really nice and be a nice place to be, and all of a sudden you're back here where we have maniacs running around some countries persecuting people, what's the lesson? Is there a lesson?
Well, I think there may be a couple. One is that some people would use the word karma, but it does seem that experiences in the past life can have an effect, at least, on where the child comes back.
Okay.
So, sort of from a self-centered standpoint, the better life you lead, perhaps the better afterlife or the better return life. I think beyond that, that these cases, and again, work in other areas, suggest that there is this consciousness piece or spiritual piece that we all have, and that it may be united in a way that we often seem so separate, but there may be this piece that we all share. So hopefully, I mean,
together as a world spirit, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, just that
soul,
we're all
anima
sort of
mundi.
all in this together, and whether we're separate, we have this separate consciousness piece that's completely separate or sort of all tied in together. I mean, who knows? But
we've talked a bit, and you basically you have all kinds of ideas about how things came about, and we've talked about the mind with a capital M on it. You use the term shared dream. Why don't we end on? Why don't you tell people what, in your viewpoint, what we see as reality, and then you got all of these people going in past life experiences that you're looking at. What made all this?
Well, I do
see
think,
today?
not just from our cases, but I think if you look at, for instance, findings in quantum physics, you can see that in many ways the world is only created when it's observed. So it's only created when it is in consciousness. And the metaphor that I use is the shared dream, that the world is not the mechanistic clockworks of Isaac Newton, but it's much more complicated than that arising out of consciousness is this physical world, and there may well be other physical worlds that arise out of consciousness also.
Agree or disagree with Dr. Jim Tucker? Highly recommend this book. Think about it, read it. Thanks for coming today.
My pleasure.